A strange spiralling white light was spotted in the early morning sky over Sydney, with even sceptical witnesses wondering if it was a UFO.
They were last seen on the beach with a tall man, and that's the best description police have ever had of him.
More than 17 years after Harold Holt disappeared into raging surf at Cheviot Beach, his widow has finally revealed his last romantic words.
Shocking, terrifying, mesmerising. That's the way a number of Australians have described their alleged encounter with the Yowie.
It's time for the Weird Crap in Australia podcast.
Welcome to the Weird Crap in Australia podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Soul. This is episode 8, part 2 of our continuing series, The True Stories Behind Wolf Creek. I'd like to introduce my fellow podcaster, Holly Hunt.
G'day.
Now, this series is all about looking at separating, I would say, actually not looking at, we're separating the fact and the fiction from the Wolf Creek film, because at the start of the movie, if you've never seen it before, it starts with the very popular phrase used in horror movies, based on true events, or inspired by true events. And we wanted to find out what those true events were. So we started last week's episode with the story of Ivan Milat, which we believe that the killer is predominantly based on. That's played by John Jarratt, Mick Taylor. So this week we're going to be talking about one of Australia's most infamous missing person cases. Nearly as infamous as Somerton Man. For more on that, check out our previous episode as well. But this particular incident, the Falconio Disappearance, I believe is something that the Wolf Creek film drew a lot of parallels with. And what those parallels were, we'll get into right now. Take it away, Holly.
All right, so we're looking at Peter Falconio. Now, Peter Falconio himself was a British backpacker who was born in 1972. He and his partner, Joanne Lees, decided to go on a trip around the world in 2001, culminating in Australia. I feel that they decided to do this because 2000 held the Sydney Olympics. So I'm assuming that's why they decided to finish up in Australia.
And a lot of Brits like to travel to Australia. You see a lot of British backpackers over here. A lot of people in Britain like to immigrate to Australia, probably because it's warmer and less raining and not as dreary. And, you know, you don't have shoe shine boys in the street. Thank shiny shoes, Gavia.
Yeah, those Cockney shoe shine boys. I don't know how the British survive without them.
Anyway.
Now, 2001 was roughly about 5-6 years after Ivan Milat was tried for his murders. It was about 5 years, pretty close to, since the Port Arthur massacre, where how many people were killed, Matthew?
I think it was 38. At the time, we held the record for the largest amount of deaths in a mass shooting anywhere in the world. Very sadly, America has overtaken us in that record.
Because of the proximity of those big international profile events, their parents and their families were worried about them heading through the open outback.
Yeah, Australia had become known as the outback serial killer destination. Especially when it comes to backpackers, Ivan Milat had not only left a lasting stain on the image of Australia here, but he'd also done it internationally. And backpackers still flock to Australia. But the legend of the outback serial killer, which would eventually evolve into the fodder for the Wolf Creek film, it was very clear and present danger for backpackers coming to Australia. Even though there are a lot more people murdered in other countries when they're backpacking, just because Ivan Milat became the backpacker murderer, the outback serial killer backpacker murderer, Australia copped that reputation, and I don't think we'll ever lose that reputation.
Peter Falconio and Joanne Lees arrived in Sydney on the 16th of January in 2001. They travelled down the Stuart Highway, which runs between Adelaide and Alice Springs, driving in a combi van. I have never driven down the Stuart Highway, but I have driven across the Hay Plains. It is a straight, boring-ass road, and I do not doubt that the Stuart Highway is exactly the same.
I'm pretty sure it is. Like, the Stuart Highway is predominantly one straight road, and it just goes right through the desert. You're not going to see a lot of stuff out there, and that's where a lot of people get themselves into trouble, because they go out there expecting to see a gas station or some sort of, a tuck shop somewhere out there, or a fast food place. There just isn't a lot out there. And it's predominantly used by what we call road trains, which are these massive trucks that have a couple of trailers hooked up.
They're usually somewhere about half a kilometre long.
Yeah.
That's how big these guys are.
Yeah, they're massive, and that's why they're called road trains. The roads are predominantly used for them. Some areas of the road, there are no speed limits.
There are also some areas of the road where there isn't actually a road, it's a dirt track.
Yeah. Now, we live in Australia, obviously. We host a podcast all about the weird happenings in Australia. If I was to travel on the Stuart Highway tomorrow, if I had to make the trip, I don't think I would be prepared for what I would need to do. And I live in Australia, so you can only imagine two British backpackers may not have been as prepared as they should have been to hit the road out there.
I mean, by all accounts, they were actually pretty prepared. It was just the events that overtook them that became the issue. They had what they needed to survive if they broke down. That wasn't the issue.
But they did break down a couple of times, though. Didn't they?
No, they didn't.
Okay.
No.
Very reliable combi van.
7:30 in the middle of July, it is pitch black out there. Like, there is no lights for literally hundreds of kilometres, hundreds of miles even.
All you have is the stars.
It's the stars. It's the numbat scaring the shit out of you in the scrub.
Numbat? You mean a wombat?
No, numbats are out there too.
Oh, okay. So numbats are, okay, this is where my ignorance is going to come out to play here a little bit. But when I was a kid,
picked the desert Australian animal. I'm pretty sure it's also on the western half. It might only be on the eastern half, but it does live in the desert, okay?
When I was a kid, I was often called a numbat for doing something stupid. I just assumed it was a dumb wombat.
No.
So what do they look like?
Google it. You know aardvarks?
Yes.
Add fur minus armor.
Oh, okay. So, okay. All right. That's interesting.
That's what a numbat looks like. Google it. Google it, people.
I will.
For those curious about what a naked aardvark looks like, Google it.
Yeah, that will satisfy your naked aardvark fetish.
They stopped for dinner at a town called Barrow Creek, which is in the Northern Territory. They were heading south. They stopped in at Red Rooster. This is crucial, remember?
Yeah, the
chicken.
The Red Rooster defense will come up later, and it blows my mind to this day that Red Rooster is associated with a legal defense. Red Rooster, of course, for our international listeners, Red Rooster is very similar to like a KFC or...
That's roast chicken, not fried chicken.
Yeah, but they actually do fried chicken pieces as well. So,
but it's mostly known for roast chicken.
Yeah, that's why it's called Red Rooster, because the skin turns a reddish color and the seasonings that they use to barbecue it or cook it. So yeah, just for some contextual clarification there.
Mm-hmm. So they stopped in at Barrow Creek. They grabbed dinner. Then they hit the road again. They had plenty of fuel. They had plenty of water. They were just driving casually down the road, and a pair of headlights appears in the rearview mirror behind them. This is all according to Joanne, by the way. I'm not making this up.
This is all very similar, of course, to how the victims approached in Wolf Creek. You know, they see two lights, you know, off in the distance, and the vehicle that's used by Mick Taylor in the Wolf Creek series, which Holly is about to describe, is very, very similar to the one that was used by the person who is now in the rear vision mirror. And if you can only imagine for a second here, You're out in the middle of the desert. You're completely alone. It's completely pitch black. And then suddenly there are two headlights in your rear vision mirror.
They didn't think it was a problem. They thought it was probably a road train. So they slowed down a little bit, moved over a little bit, and the car actually came up beside them and tried and flagged at them, waved at them to pull them over.
Hey, look, hey, over here. Hey, look, listen, hey.
And that stupid Firefly makes another appearance. Yes. The vehicle was a white four-wheel drive ute with a green cage on the back.
As we've explained before, and I think we need to continue to explain, a ute is shorthand for what we call a utility vehicle. What you would call in America would be a truck, or a pickup.
Falconio was driving, so he pulled the combi over and climbed out to talk to the other driver who had parked behind them. The driver of the other car, the white car, explained that he'd seen sparks coming from the van's tailpipe. So Peter Falconio and the stranger went around to the back of the van to have a look at what was going on.
This actually happened to me as well, but from the opposite perspective of Falconio. I was driving along the highway. I do a lot of night driving because of my day job, which is actually technically a night job. And what I saw out there once, there was someone, they hadn't tied up their rigging properly on their ute. And so there were clips and they were bouncing off the asphalt and they were bouncing around. It was causing the stream of sparks. And I was doing the same thing. Like I was actually flashing the guy in front of me to let him know that his rigging was bouncing all along the road and creating all these sparks. He did not pull over, quite possibly because of stories like this.
More than likely. That is my instinct. Just putting it out there. Now, from behind the vehicle, the two men had vanished behind the vehicle. Joanne Lees jumped in the driver's seat so she could keep an eye on it through the rear vision mirror. And there was suddenly a bang. Then the stranger appears next to Lees, holding a silver gun through the window, and forces her into the back seat.
And can you only imagine how terrifying this is? You're in the middle of the nowhere. It's pitch black. Fiancé has gone off with this dude to have a chat and have a look. You hear a bang. You see a gun. I can only imagine the nightmare scenario that is going on right now for this poor woman.
So fear clenched her up. She let him tie her hands behind her back, but she didn't let him tape her mouth or tie her feet together. I'm assuming she probably kicked him a couple of times. Joanne Lees was dragged into the back of the man's four-wheel drive. I have actually found a photo of this. It is literally a green cage. If she managed to get locked in there, she would not have been able to get back out again.
And this also goes to show how motivated this guy was. Like he'd essentially built a little people cage on the back of his ute, meaning that this is probably not the first time he's done this, because there's also a lot of there's a method to this. Pull the car over, tell them that there are problems with the vehicle. The man gets out of the car, walks to the back of the vehicle, immobilize him very quickly, scare the female occupant, tie her up, put her in a cage. This is a method. This is a process that this killer has probably gone through before.
Joanne managed to open one of the doors and bolted into the scrub while the man was distracted. She doesn't know exactly what he was doing, but she theorized that he was moving Falconio's body. The man grabbed a torch, looked for her in the scrub everywhere, and walked past her 3 times.
Yeah, her story here is something that's quite exceptional. She ran out into the scrub, and as soon as she was clear of the light, she basically ducked to the ground and stayed as silent as she possibly could. So again, if you think of a horror film, when you see the potential victim, they're flat against the ground and they can hear the crunching of their assailant's boots as they walk around them, shining a light back and forth. Just the fact that he missed her the first time, how relieved she would have been only to have to go through that process a second and third time.
Remember, she still has her hands tied behind her back too, so she can't even stifle sobs or screams or panting with her hands. So she's probably had to hold her breath a lot. So she managed to hide until he was gone and flagged down a road train as it drove through at 12:35 a.m. That means she was, between the time that she left Barrow Creek and the time she was picked up, there was 5 hours in there. So she spent a lot of time laying on the ground praying to God that she wasn't about to die.
It's a very, very traumatic experience.
The road train took her back to Barrow Creek, which is where they stopped to have Red Rooster. They made a report to the police station. The problem is that Lees only ever saw the gunman in either the dark or the half light, so she couldn't recognise his face if she ever saw him again. Alice Springs Police Station were called in at 4:20 a.m. They arrived at Barrow Creek at 4:20 a.m. and with the help of the truck driver who picked Lees up, they set out to find Falconio, the combi, and the gunman at 7 a.m. when light broke. They drove all the way back to the crime scene, but all they found was a pool of dried blood covered in dirt and the combi driven 80 metres off into the scrub.
And that's basically trying to hide the evidence. So at this point, he's lost his potential victim and he's got to hide the evidence. So, driving the combi van off into far enough away that he can get back to his own vehicle, but not too far so that it takes him hours to get back. And then you've got the dry blood of Falconio, possibly at the crime scene.
8 hours after she was picked up, so about 8:30, roadblocks finally went up, which was completed about 9 a.m, on the 12 most likely escape routes. I have to point out here that in outback Australia, an escape route can literally be in pretty much any direction.
Yeah, an escape route could be 360 degrees on a dime. You could go left, right, back. It doesn't matter. There's just so much open space out there.
There's no fences. There's not really any dry creek beds you have to worry about. There's no trees. You can just pick a direction and drive in it, and someone probably won't see you for a day.
And then you camp out, you wait a couple of days, you circle back, you get back on the road, and you keep going.
Yeah. So, I don't know what they expected to do about roadblocks about 9 hours after the fact, but, When they searched the area, they only found Lee's footprints. They didn't find Falconio's body. They didn't find trail from the attacker or his vehicle. Where he was looking for her in the scrub, they couldn't find his footprints. And they even called in a couple of Aboriginal trackers and they couldn't even find them.
Yeah, Aboriginal trackers are generally, they're the best of the best, are very, very good at what they do. And this is where it starts to get weird. There are going to be a lot of weird things that we talk about in this case. I don't believe in victim blaming, and we won't blame the victim in this case, but to have her frantic footprints and not have her assailant's footprints is very odd, to say the least. Not impossible, but odd.
Either he knew what he was doing to get rid of them, or he walked on rocks the entire time.
Could be the case. He did have a light. He did have a torch. She did not.
There is speculation that he's done it before based on the years at which he did this, so there's always the chance that he could have.
And no one is assuming at this point that a Yowie did it.
No, nor a Bunyip.
Nor a Bunyip. Yeah, that's right, because from our Bunyips and Yowies episodes, the Yowie is the nice one and the Bunyip's the mean one.
Yeah, but the Bunyip lives in the water, so it's definitely not out in the desert.
Don't look at me, I'm just your friendly Yowie. I just come to say hello.
We're not bringing in another character. Mary, whatever his name is, was enough, thank you.
Major Meredith from our
That's the one.
Emu War episode.
Now that they've established their, quote, crime scene, even though all they found was blood, Joanne Lees was, of course, attacked by journalists from every news station. And her story shifted a bit, depending on who was talking to her. However, you do have to worry about the fact that she was freaking out in the middle of the night knowing she was going to die. You're not going to remember everything.
It's probably one of the most disgusting attacks by the media that has been made in this country, because We don't know the facts. The crime scene is still being investigated, and journalists digging into Lees's history like nothing else. They're going into every aspect of their lives because this case is so mysterious. You know, they can either blame her because of the inconsistencies in the story or the missing gaps in the story, or they can all face up to the reality that there is an outback serial killer who is very elusive and they know what they're doing. And I think the second prospect was just far too hard for the public to swallow, and so a more sensational story would have been far more interesting for the Australian public, and it was wrong. There hadn't been no trial, there had been no clear suspect, you know, nothing was established yet, but the Australian media was running rampant, making assumptions. And to this day, I think a lot of those journalists that wrote about Lees should be ashamed of themselves for their conduct. So, yeah, I feel very passionately about that. We often blame people. We often try and blame the victim in these mysterious circumstances, and evidence is usually, disregards. Just because a piece of evidence is missing does not mean that one of the victims was involved somehow. It's a poor assumption that people make.
And yet Australian media has a precedent for doing this. Azaria and Lindy Chamberlain, which was actually likened to the case.
Yeah, we're going to do a that's the very famous quote that's often.
Dingo ate my baby.
Yeah, dingo ate more baby. That's always taken.
Cockney.
Yeah, that's true. At any rate, yeah, Lindy Chamberlain. We'll do a full podcast on that and the disappearance of their baby. It's very, very similar to this. You blame the victim just because there's not enough evidence to directly link it to a serial killer. It's very, very sad.
Okay. A $250,000 reward was offered for information for Falconio's body, for the attacker, for anything. But the only lead they found was some unidentified male DNA traces on Lee's shirt, the cable ties used to hold her hand, and the combi's gear stick.
All right, so that's basically everything we know from Lee's perspective over the attack. Now we're going to introduce a new player into this horrific event. And how would you describe him, Holly?
A drug-running outback mechanic who knows a lot of hidden roads in the outback and can avoid the police like it's no one's business. He owned a white four-wheel drive Land Cruiser ute, which was constantly being modified to stay ahead of the police, who would try and identify it on the road.
And what was this friendly outback mechanic drug dealer's name?
Bradley John Murdoch. He was born in Western Australia, but he moved around a lot as a kid because he was always in trouble with the cops for one thing or another. He was incredibly racist against the Aboriginal population, especially around Broome, because when the Mabo decision came down, do you want to explain what the Mabo decision is, Matthew?
If I recall my high school history classes, which at this point I have not been in those classes for 15 years nearly, Holly. I'll do my best here, but if I remember correctly, Mabo was the declaration of starting to give Indigenous Australians back land rights to their traditional land, right?
Yeah, it was the nullification of terra nullius, the legal, quote, legal term used to declare that Australia was uninhabited when the white guys arrived.
Yeah, Captain Cook rocked up and he saw the Aboriginal people, disregarded them and was like,
they're not human.
Yeah, I do declare that this area is terra nullius. Now, where's that giant turtle?
Not an American. What the hell?
I don't know. How do you what is British Captain Cook?
I do declare.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I do declare that this country is terra nullius. Now, where is that giant turtle, which only recently died? The Galapagos turtle that he had as a pet. We had a turtle. This is a story in itself, but we had a turtle in Australia that Captain Cook found when he landed in Australia. He took this Galapagos turtle as a pet. They're massive turtles. They're enormous turtles. And this thing survived, but for something, it was crazy. It was something like 150 years. It saw the birth and rise of modern Australia. It's something that's quite exceptional. Captain Cook's turtle, you can look that up.
The Mabo decision basically declared that if a piece of land didn't have an owner, like if they hadn't already leased it out, then it would be legally returned to the Aboriginal people, which is one of the reasons why Ayers Rock is now called Uluru. It was handed back to the Aboriginals with a 99-year lease to the white man. When this went down, the Western Australian government started creating dummy leases, basically, to prevent the Aboriginals from getting anything because the Australian government is hella racist. And one of those plots was owned by Bradley John Murdoch. Now, when the Mabo decision came down, it nullified those dummy leases, and he got really, really upset that he lost this piece of land. So he went out with his hunting rifle, and as the local Aboriginals were celebrating a football win, he took a couple of shots at their leader.
Yeah. So they were out celebrating, and here comes Murdoch, pushes through the bushes, probably drunk, off his face.
He was actually sniping. He wasn't actually nearby. He was sniping.
Oh, Jesus. That's even more premeditated. But yeah, this dude has been a piece of shit from day one.
Yeah, he went to jail for possession and use of a stolen gun, so you already know that he's in with absolutely no good.
Also, just again to reiterate your point about racism in Australia, Holly, he was sent to jail for an unregistered gun, not attempted murder.
Yeah, he almost killed the leader's girlfriend and came incredibly close to killing the leader. So, apparently racism was still existent into the early 80s.
Oh, absolutely it was.
For more details, see Ivan Milat. Police began tracking down owners of a white Toyota Land Cruiser a couple of weeks after Peter Falconio went missing, and they actually interviewed Bradley Murdoch on November 1st, a couple of months after Falconio went disappeared. But they didn't take a DNA sample because his face didn't match the composite sketch that Lees had provided. Remember, Lees only saw him by the back end of a torchlight and in the dark. It's going to be unreliable to begin with. But yeah, no DNA test was taken. 17th of May 2002, Murdoch's drug-running accomplice was caught by the cops and squealed about his connections to the Falconio case. At this point, a DNA test was taken, but it wasn't of Bradley, it was of his brother, who I can't remember the name of. He had two brothers. One of them was long dead, but they took a DNA test of the law-abiding brother. And it was a very close match to the unnamed DNA in the case.
Yeah, this is what they do these days, and this was how the Golden State Killer was caught in America, which is in and of itself a very fascinating case. But what happens is you use what they refer to as familial DNA. That means that they've got a partial DNA match, which means they've located someone within the killer's family tree. And then what they can start to do is, keep winding it back until they manage to track someone down. If they share, let's say, 50% of the DNA, then you can match it up to, and I'm being very simplistic about this, there's a lot of advanced science here. But what you can do is you can match it up to a father or a brother.
Nowadays, they use Ancestry.com. Back then, they had to actually ask people.
Yeah, Ancestry.com. They get proprietary rights to your DNA when you use their service. Look at the terms and conditions, people, before you end up giving a company the right to clone you.
I don't think they're going to get to that point, Matthew.
If they do, they have the legal right to do it.
Bradley Murdoch was arrested on the 22nd of August in 2002. This was about 3 or 4 months on the run, and he was actually arrested for the kidnap and assault of a different person in an unrelated case in South Australia.
Yeah, so we're starting to really build up a profile of this guy. Even if he's not the killer, he's a massive piece of shit.
Yeah, he deserves to go in jail either way. They extradited him to the Northern Territory, where he was actually tried. and found guilty, even though his lawyer kept saying it's all circumstantial evidence. It's like, no, it's not.
Yeah, so this is quite interesting. Yeah, you have the DNA, and I think that's probably the strongest piece of evidence that you do have in this case.
I don't know. There was a reason why there was his DNA on Joanne Lees' shirt, Matthew. It's a very innocent reason.
We're going to talk about that in a second, but I just before we do, because it's really stupid, but before we do that, the DNA was the strongest temple of the case. Also, they were able to put him in the area. But when his lawyer did say that there was a lot of circumstantial evidence, there is. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence that was used here. Murdoch did travel those areas quite frequently, could very well have been in contact with the victims. We're going to talk about that in a sec, but I think it should be stated that Lees was not a reliable witness. Not that she wasn't a reliable person. I'm not taking a crack at her.
They're two different things.
They're two different things, but she's an unreliable witness because she couldn't see the killer's face. The whole area was obscured by pitch blackness, and it all happened so quickly. For the prosecution to then use her as a look at everything she's saying is 100% accurate, I think was wrong in that trial, and her testimony should really have been taken with a grain of salt just because of the circumstances in which she witnessed the events. I'm not saying that she's lying, but I'm also saying that that her testimony could be fallible just because of the circumstances that she found herself in. And I would say that about any witness, male or female, at any age group who happened to be caught in a similar situation. Before I get hate mail.
One of the biggest problems with the case was that they still, even as of this date, have not found Falconio's body.
That's why it's still one of the biggest mysteries in Australia, because he's never been recovered.
Not a single part of him, his possessions, nothing.
Completely vanished.
Yeah. So he was tried in absence of a body and found guilty. He was sentenced to a mandatory life sentence with 28 years non-parole period, which apparently he spends a lot of his time behind bars in the machine shop, building shit.
Yeah, he was always good at it. Murdoch would, as we talked about earlier, he would modify his vehicle. Often he was a bush mechanic. And so, yeah, that was his pastime, was modifying that vehicle.
Speaking of, one of the things that is circumstantial but not really seen as being that unusual in the outback was that his vehicle was actually fitted with an extra fuel tank that could give him 1,800 kilometers more than a normal car of that type.
Yeah, that's a big hunting radius out there in the outback. That allows him to move a lot more freely than you would expect. This is where we start to see, once again, just like Ivan Milat in attitude, Falconio, the Falconio Disappearance and Murdoch. Murdoch really provides a lot of inspiration for the motivations of Mick Taylor. It informs how that character hunts, how he kills. Mick Taylor has a utility vehicle. Mick Taylor has the spare petrol tank. He has a wide killing field.
He has the mechanical knowledge that he needs to fix his car when some asshole puts sand in his fuel stick.
Or he can disable somebody's car, which we've also seen him do in the films and the TV shows. So Murdoch's MO is very, very similar to Mick Taylor's in the Wolf Creek film. And that's where that direct inspiration comes from. As well again...
Bush knowledge.
Yeah, the bush knowledge. As well again, though, Murdoch's victims, in this case, were two British backpackers. Once again, very similar to the British victims and the backpacker victims in the first Wolf Creek film.
Yeah, and he just vanished. If Lees hadn't got away from him, then who knows if any of this would have been found. It could very well have been like the Wolf Creek series where you see just pictures of like the last scene here, and then that's it.
Yeah, and they disappear into the wilderness. The main character in the film that actually survives, the guy. Oh, do you remember what the guy's name was?
Jesus?
No, they call him Jesus later on because he kind of looks like Jesus. But yeah, that is the character. So at the end of the film, it's suggested that he himself was suspected as the killer of the two women, that an extensive search of the outback never revealed who he was. So yeah, at the end of the Wolf Creek film, that character is himself touted as an unreliable witness. It suggested that the killings were blamed on him initially, and the outback killer has never been found. So this is directly inspired by Lees's her story. Yeah, her survival. It pretty much is mirrored with our survivor character in the Wolf Creek film. So, you know, I would say at this point that I don't think Lees was lying, really. I mean, they bring up shit about her all the time. Yes, she was having an affair on Falconio. She's not the first person who's engaged to be married to have an affair. She certainly will not be the last. It's just, I think society, if a man...
Victim blaming society, that's just how it is. We like to dig up dirt on the people we can see. If we can't see the murderer, then we're not going to dig dirt up on them. Yeah,
see, victim blaming works quite well when you need an easy solution, because people really like an easy solution to a complicated problem. People like to think that they themselves are incredibly reliable witnesses, and as I've said in previous podcasts, and I'll continue to say this, you are not. You are very fallible. I am very fallible. Our memories are incredibly fallible and can be biased and influenced. And, you know, it's sort of crazy how memory works in that way. So, yeah, Lees did the best she could with what she had available to her, which was, you know, barely any light and a very quick death of her partner. And she was suddenly thrown into this horrible situation very quickly. I don't think anyone else would be able to react any better in those sort of circumstances.
Yeah, no matter how many horror movies you've watched, as soon as it happens to you, it is all cards off the table.
Yeah, you've got three options. You got fight, you got flight, or you've got freeze up. And a lot of people freeze up. Their body protects them. Their brain insulates them from what's happening around them. And that's why you hear a lot of the time when it comes to people who have been victims of rape, their perpetrator will say, they just sat there and took it. Because what will happen is the human brain is an amazing organ, and it will essentially shut down and insulate the person who is being attacked. And it's a self-defense mechanism, and it doesn't mean consent. It's the exact opposite. It's pure terror that leads to your body shutting down certain functions. So yeah, I think Lee has probably been subjected to a lot of bullshit that was completely unnecessary in her case. She was the victim, and the journalist that wrote about her, I hope that they feel some guilt over the way they reported those stories to make money and get people clicking on websites. You know, that being said, the case does raise questions about the evidence that Murdoch was convicted on. And going all the way back, because we did skip over this, Murdoch's defense about the DNA would become and would be known as the Red Rooster defense. Do you want to take us through that, Holly?
Yeah, so Joanne Lees had some of his DNA on the back of her shirt. There are two types of DNA tests that we used. There was a low DNA test and a high DNA test. Now, the low DNA test was used to work out who it was, and the high DNA test was used to link him to it. So the low one was not admissible in court, so we're not going to worry about that. But the high one was a bunch on the back of her shirt that was absolutely 100% Murdoch's DNA. There was 150 million to 1 chance that someone else random in the Northern Territory would have the same DNA. Now, his excuse for that DNA being on her shirt was, quote, I bumped into her at Red Rooster buying chicken for me and my dog.
Now, this is kind of a weird one, but Murdoch really loved his dog and would buy at Red Rooster all the time. Like, he would buy the dog takeaway food. It must have been a fat fucking dog.
I mean, that's what the cage on the back of his car was supposedly for, was for putting the dog in, so. But yeah, in April 2006, after he was sentenced, after he was in jail, it came out that Murdoch refused to eat chicken during his jail time or during the trial because he was allergic to it, and a doctor agreed.
Yep.
So what the fuck was he doing in Red Rooster if he couldn't eat chicken?
Well, he said he was going to Red Rooster to get something for the dog.
No, he said for himself and his dog.
Okay.
Specifically for himself and his dog. If he can't eat chicken, then that sounds like bullshit to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, for me personally, I think Murdoch is probably guilty of the case. Do I think there was enough evidence to actually convict him on that? No, I don't. Even though there is the DNA evidence, I think like pop culture these days has geared people towards believing that DNA evidence itself is not fallible. It absolutely is. Cross-contamination and shit like that can happen. And crazier things in this world have happened than, you know, someone having a cut on their hand and leaving blood on someone. I think that about this all the time because what happens in my own day job is I'm putting stuff on a shelf. Every now and then I'll get a nick or a cut that I won't notice. And I will, you know, leave DNA in a weird area. I mean, it's like, let's say I accidentally get some DNA on a product, someone takes it home. Does that link me to that person's crime scene? You know what I mean?
It's even simpler than that. If you happen to sneeze in the wrong direction, it lands on a jar of beans, someone takes the jar of beans home and they get murdered.
Yeah, you can find these DNA profiles. So we live in a world that popular culture has sort of built it up that DNA is the most credible piece of evidence, and it's not. Like DNA, like the way that the court system should work, of course, is that DNA plus this evidence, plus this evidence, plus this evidence should suggest that this person did this. You know, we do not live in a justice system that's foolproof, and that's why we have to build up evidence. What's your personal take on it, Holly? Like, do you think Murdoch was guilty as well, but do you think there was enough evidence to prosecute him?
Unfortunately, if I was on the jury, he probably wouldn't have gotten a reasonable doubt. Like, I have a reasonable doubt to believe that he did not.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the sad thing about it. I think he did it, though. I'm not saying I think he did. Like, it makes a lot of sense. This dude was a piece of shit in the first place. And the fact that his DNA was on her and that she identified his ute, as well as surveillance footage that was found of him filling up the ute at a petrol station very close to where everything went down. You know, so they do have location. Again, that's circumstantial. Anyone can be filmed at a petrol station filling up at any time. But yeah, it's, you know, for me, I feel that it's pretty much the case that he was probably guilty, but there wasn't not enough evidence to convict him, especially for a life sentence, because it's pretty extreme when you see that some people get away with murder on a 35-year prison sentence. And they say, like, it was just I happen to think that maybe police knew something about Murdoch that we will never know. Maybe he was implicated in the death of someone else, or maybe they were starting to link different disappearances to him. And then on top of that, his aggravated assault and aggravated sexual violence charges, coupled with kidnapping, coupled with attempted murder in the 80s. Stolen weapons. All of this sort of stuff. Yeah, it was probably deemed that he was too dangerous to be left out in the general population.
As my mother used to say, if you don't deserve it now, you'll deserve it later.
I'm glad your mother is not a judge. Just saying. Sorry, Veronica, if you listen to this. Now, like we've been trying to do here, I initially set out, this is sort of the funny thing. I'm going to have to do a bit of a reversal here. I set out to make fun at the trope of based on true events or inspired by true events. At this point, Holly, we are finding a lot of real life inspirations for the Wolf Creek film.
Yeah, for this film particular, don't apply this to every single one of them, because I know a lot of films who were, quote, based on true events, and maybe it's one name.
Yeah, it's like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is probably the most famous of all of these sort of based on true story horror films. But that in and itself is very loosely based on a guy called Ed Gein. And he was not wielding a chainsaw. He did live in, it wasn't Texas he lived in. He lived in, I don't want to say Wyoming, but it's kind of like that sort of area. Fuck.
The Deep South.
No, he wasn't in the Deep South. He was in like cheese country. Like dairy country. I just can't remember where it was. Anyway, at any rate, the similarities between him and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, yeah, they're pretty tenuous. But yeah, when it comes to Wolf Creek, I think initially I set out to knock a lot of it back and poke a little bit of fun at it. But as we've been researching this more and more, there are a lot of really good inspirations for the character.
Unlike most horror films, people actually did their research on this one.
They seem to have. There is no character like Mick Taylor. There is no quote-unquote outback serial killer that's loose and roaming about, however, that we know of. However, there are a lot of really good inspirations that have been woven into this narrative, and there is a lot of truth behind this movie. So I will have to start walking back my comments when I'm talking about this movie going forward, because, you know, they have done really well to be inspired and use that inspiration in a fairly accurate way. So I'll give them that. Like, even Mick Taylor, he snipes a couple of these victims as well, very similar to how Murdoch tried to kill those people. You know, there are a lot of ties here. But yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for the Falconio disappearance. I do recall there was a gun found in it was either a septic tank or a water tank. And that was part of a renewed search to try and find Falconio's body. That happened about a year or so ago at this point.
Well, in 2017, an anonymous letter was actually sent to the cops that someone had been commissioned to melt Falconio's body down and dump him in the Swan River in Perth. The author apparently instead buried the bags containing Falconio in a remote part of Western Australia. I don't know how much of this to believe. It feels like a Zodiac letter.
Yeah, it does. And they were never able to locate the body based on what the letter told them.
No.
You know, so, yeah. Though, you know, it's quite interesting. Like, was that part of Murdoch's cleanup? And he did know people in low places. Maybe he did have someone that could do that.
Why travel to Perth to do it? Why not just do it in the outback in your own barrel of acid?
Yeah, I know. It's very, yeah. You are right. Like, it's pretty tenuous. To this day, there are a lot of rumors about Falconio, that he faked his own death, that it's all an elaborate ruse because of their failing relationship, that it was all done to escape bad debt. You know, there's a lot of stories about Falconio. Just because people don't have the body, that's generally what people will do. There's no denying that Falconio's blood was found at the scene. There was a decent amount of it, and a shot rang out into the night, and no one has ever been able to find him since.
I do have to point out that even when they do have a body, people do this. Look at Elvis and Hitler.
Yep, very, very true. Very, very true. We didn't touch much on Lee's adultery, and we're not going to. I don't think it was relevant.
Her personage is not part of this issue, so we're not going to go into her human failings.
Yeah, exactly right. I think the media went way too much into this,
They do every time.
They do every time, yeah. It's sensational, like the idea that this woman who was having an affair orchestrated this elaborate death of her fiancé to escape him and fall into the love of, the hands of the Irish man that she'd been dating, blah, 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 blah. It's
If you're going to leave someone, just leave them. Jesus Christ.
It's sensationalist dribble, and people really lap it up. They love that sort of stuff. But yeah, Falconio's body to this day has never been recovered, and I would say at this point never will be recovered. Yeah, it's long gone. But I think he is quite dead. And on that note, we'll end the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. This is our first series, so I really hope you're enjoying it. Next week, we're going to be discussing, Holly,
the Snowtown murders.
The Snowtown murders. These are also a very gory page.
Otherwise known as the bodies in the barrel.
Yep. I read the whole book on Snowtown, so I'll have a lot to add when it comes to this particular mystery and murders and all sorts of. There's a lot of stuff to go into on this one. Probably the least linking true life event to the movies, though, and I'll talk about that next week. After that, we have another serial killer to talk about, and then we're going to go through some of the statistics that are bandied about in the Wolf Creek films. So that's all coming up on our series, Wolf Creek Fact or Fiction. It's proving to be a lot bigger than we thought. I think what do we think? Maybe 2 episodes?
3. It was slated as 3.
It was slated as 3, but the more research Holly did, the more links she discovered. So there you go. Find us on all the social medias. Find us on Instagram and Facebook. Of course, big thank you to my co-host, Holly Hunt. Without her, I would have to do the research.
Yes, like you should be doing. Although you're probably going to take the lead on Snowtown anyway, because you know so much about it.
Of course, please stay safe out there. It's a scary, scary world. And just remember, when you see those lights in the rearview mirror, they may not be friendly. The Weird Crap in Australia podcast is produced by Holly and Matthew Soul for The Modern Meltdown. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please rate and review on your favourite podcatching app.